Forbes released an amazing story. A reporter for them spent a day with N95 medical mask producers. Not just the producers, it's the producers and the sellers. And what they learned is infuriating. So they say the following: millions of N95 masks have been available throughout the US, Canada, and the UK during the pandemic, according to brokers trying to sell them. Millions of them, guys. The high price point per mask, driven by extreme demand, has contributed to an overwhelmed reaction among potential buyers, especially in the US. Scrutiny surrounding these deals is high because of ongoing scams and claims of price gouging, both of which are triggering emotionally charged reactions and fear of making deals. Millions of masks are being purchased by foreign buyers and are leaving the country, according to the brokers, while the domestic need remains alarmingly high. Okay, so that's bad enough, but look at this. By the end of the day, roughly 280 million masks from warehouses around the U.S. had been purchased by foreign buyers and were earmarked to leave the country, according to the broker. And that was in one day. To his knowledge, none of the masks had been purchased by buyers in the U.S. Oh, boy. Oh, God. All right, so listen, this is somewhat personal to me because I have people on the front line. I know people on the front line. And they say it. Hey, we have a shortage. We have a shortage of all what they call the PPE. The various kinds of masks, shortage of all that stuff. You know, I've told you guys that on the front line in China, they're wearing hazmat suits. Here, our front line people are not wearing hazmat suits, so maybe that's one of the reasons why many of them are getting sick. That this thing is actually a lot more contagious than everybody originally thought. It's at least twice as contagious as the flu. So something's going on there. But frontline people in China are wearing hazmat suits and they're not wearing them here. Maybe we should have hazmat suits, but nobody's wearing them here. So it's like there's a massive shortage of everything that we need here. Ventilators is another one that's super important that we have a shortage of. So during a crisis, the government has the ability, they have the legal authority to, like the Defense Production Act that we talk about all the time now. Trump said, I will now mandate by law that certain businesses have to make the ventilators, for example, other protective gear. And that's good. He should do that. Now, he said, I'm going to use the act, and then he sat around for a week or two as New York was getting obliterated, and then finally he said, all right, fine, GM, this plant makes ventilators, for example. So, but here we have a situation when it comes to the N95 masks. We have the number that we need, if not more. But again, I'll repeat it. Roughly 280 million masks from warehouses around the U.S. had been purchased by foreign buyers and were earmarked to leave the country. Why was it not the case from early March? Now we're in early April. Why didn't they do it in early March, where the government says, They step in, they go, no, we'll pay you a fair market price, but per mask, but we're going to seize all those masks and we're going to distribute them to the front line here. Now you could say, well, if it's front line, then you don't even need as many masks as they have. You don't need 280 million if you're just talking about the frontline workers here in the U.S. Whatever. I'm not an expert. I don't know the exact number that you need for the front line. But I do know the government should have done everything in their power to make sure that the front line in the U.S. gets these masks. And they didn't. They're dragging their feet. They don't know what they're doing. Some of the people who were working for these companies that were creating and selling these masks, they were saying, well, it's tough because even when we talk to the government, and they're not talking to them as much as they should, it was a relatively recent thing, there's like 4 or 5 different middlemen that jump in that are working with the government, and then you start thinking it's a scam, and you don't know what the deal is, you don't know if you trust them. This is insane, man. During a pandemic, during a crisis, we have hundreds of millions of these things laying around, and we can't get them to the front line where they're desperately needed. That's unconscionable. That's absurd. I absolutely would have early on in the crisis, immediately got into contact with these companies and said, very simply, we will pay you a fair market price, but we're basically forcing you to give us, the number that we need. And we'd be fine if we did that. We'd be in a hell of a lot better position than we are right now. Add this on top of the infuriating story about ventilators that I told you guys. How in 2009, the U.S. government contracted with a smaller medical device company in California, and they said, we're going to make a smaller, cheaper, easier to use ventilator. And they created the prototypes, showed the government liked them, they ordered, a large amount of them. It was like 70 to 100,000, something in that range. And then a bigger medical device company called Covidien bought up the smaller company and then canceled the federal contract. And the government was caught, and they approved it too, but now we're in a position where we didn't have the stockpile that we needed. Even if they created that stockpile, it wasn't enough. But we'd have 70 to 100,000 more ventilators. So we'd be in a much better position than we are right now. We only have 160,000 ventilators in the entire country. And for this crisis, it's estimated we need about 960,000. So, but we would have had 70 to 100,000 more if we didn't have basically monopoly power and corruption and a bought government screwing us. So, you would think that something like pandemic preparedness, especially since experts said we're definitely going to have one at some point, you think that would have been a higher priority, but it's not. And now as a result of it, we have shortages of certain things, and then other things there's not a shortage, but at a time when our front line is getting hammered, 280 million masks are earmarked to be sent out. And then there was the other story of we sent a bunch of personal protective equipment to Thailand. As people on the front lines are like, we need that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I'll tell you what, you've never seen a stronger argument for an intelligent, coordinated central authority than a pandemic. Never seen it this strong of an argument before. Because what you absolutely need in a crisis like this is efficient, competent leaders who are coordinating, and also you need a national health system. Let's be serious. You can't have this, bifurcated, fractured, ragtag amalgamation of a bunch of different systems under the same umbrella of like American healthcare. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And this is why we're one of the worst in the world now in terms of the number of cases. I would say the worst, but some of the other countries are fudging their numbers. But I also think that we're probably fudging our numbers too. I'm sure there's been deaths that are attributed that really are COVID that they're just marking down as like, lung issue or heart attack or whatever. So what a mess. What a mess. What a mess. What a mess. 280 million masks. 280 million. They were sitting in a warehouse and now they're ordered from overseas as our front line has a shortage of virtually everything. Jesus, man. It's unbelievable. Now, Trump was saying he just stockpiled hydrochloroquine, the one of the drugs that potentially fights this. He said he has 29 million doses that he stockpiled. And some people on the left are like, well, it's an unproven treatment, so why are you going all in on this treatment? That's a fair point, but at the same time, I think it's a little overstated because now the issue is so politicized with that medicine that now like the entire left seems to argue like that it's useless, and the entire right is convinced it's like a miracle cure. The reality is actually somewhere in the middle. I know that New York City on the front lines, they're using that drug, and they were using it before Trump said anything about it. So there are many medical professionals who say, no, actually, this is, a decent treatment. But anyway, the point I was going to make is not only would I stockpile that, I would stockpile all of the potential treatments which could work. Because there's actually quite a few drugs that they're studying right now that have some degree of promise. I mean, obviously it varies depending on the drug and the nature of the drug, but I would try to stockpile every single one of those kinds of drugs. And the sense I get is we're only concerned about stockpiling this one because there might be a cozy relationship between whoever makes it and the government. That's what I'm concerned about. Because I know that, just to give one example, Ativan is a treatment that also shows some promise, also known as favipiravir, which we've spoken about on the show, but it's made by a Japanese company. So I fear that the reason why we're not going all in on that treatment, and the reason why Trump doesn't talk about that treatment a lot, is because it's a Japanese company, and perhaps they didn't pay the U.S. government, their bribes. If they did, maybe they would be hawked as a potential cure, but I'm so distraught as to the 1,001 ways in which we didn't prepare for this. And the results are devastating.